So it's December, and if we needed an excuse, here it is to dig out our seasonal sweaters, which in my case is a lady's Lithuanian coat, which was knitted to Copley's pattern 1593, and I have used vintage 3-ply, which I had in my stash. It's an absolutely fascinating pattern in many ways, not least of which is why a lady's Lithuanian coat. Company was based in Manchester and London. Maybe there was a Lithuanian community. Maybe one of the designers came from Lithuania. But I can't find any information to suggest that this is a traditionally Lithuanian design. But maybe there's someone in the group who could throw some more light on that. Secondly, unlike any other vintage knitting pattern that I've used to make a garment, this does not just have the back, 2 fronts, 2 sleeves. It actually has the back, which is in the green pattern. It has 2 central fronts, which show the rather nice moose design, and also the green pattern to the side. But they also have 2 side front panels, which make this the knitting equivalent of the princess line, which is more usually associated with dressmaking. Fascinating idea that they would use that for a cardigan, and it certainly gives it a really nice fit. The other thing with a cardigan like this is to try and date when the pattern actually comes from. And just looking at the front cover of the pattern, well, it's obviously screaming 1940s. But the question is when in the 1940s? Now, there are quite a lot of hints and clues in the actual printed pattern that would give you an indication as to when this was originally issued. And the first of which is the size of the pattern. This is 10 inches by 7.5 inches, and it runs to 8 pages. Now, this size of pattern was not unusual in the previous decade. I mean, here's an example of a 1930s pattern, also from my stash. Unfortunately, it's a very tatty one, Peyton's and Baldwin pattern. And you can see it is very much the same sort of size as this one. And this is definitely a 1930s design. The second indication is that by the mid-1940s, paper was becoming much more scarce, and so a pattern for a lady's cardigan, such as this pretty jumper, which is a Bestway pattern, would have been printed on just 2 sides of 1 piece of paper, and even laid out flat, this is smaller than the Copley's pattern. So it's fairly clear that this must date from much earlier in the decade, or at least it would seem to. Final clue is in the amount of yarn that's required. Inside this pattern, it states that you need 7 ounces of the neutral, 3 ounces of the green, and 1 ounce each of the brown, the blue, and the red. Now, setting aside that quite a lot of people, especially if they were regular knitters, would almost certainly have had bits and pieces of yarn left over from other projects that they could use for the smaller pieces, you're still looking at 10 ounces of wool for the main part of the garment. And in mid-1941, clothing went on ration in the United Kingdom. Now, at that point, each adult was offered 66 coupons, and that was what they had to use for their clothing allocation for the whole year. And to give you an indication of a comparator, a dress would cost you about 7 coupons. A luxury item where you're able to get it, like nylon stockings, would be 2 coupons per stocking. And wool was also on ration. So for each 2 ounces of wool you wanted to buy, you'd have to have a coupon. And so for the main part of the wool on this, you're looking at 5 coupons, which is about a month's worth of your allocation. And I can see a stylish lady or stylish person going, yep, that's fine. I'm happy to give 1 month of my allocation in order to be able to knit this rather splendid design. The thing is that by the end of the war, the ration had been severely contracted, and rather than the 66 coupons per adult that had been allocated in 1941, by 1945 it was down to 24 coupons, and rationing did continue for some time after the end of the war. So all in all, with the size of the pattern and the amount of yarn, I think that this is most likely an early 1940s pattern, and that it could possibly date from as early as 1940, almost certainly prior to or around the time of the introduction of rationing. That's what I think. But the other fascinating thing about this pattern is that this is my version of it, which is 4D, but there exists an entirely separate pattern a version here with exactly the same garment, looks like the same skirt, same number, different model, different price. This is 6 old pens rather than 4 old pens, which makes me wonder whether after the war they decided to reissue the pattern with the same number, obviously, because it was such a popular design and wool by that point was more readily available. Having said the which, you know, new look had come in. Would people really be making sweaters like this after the war? Really don't know. It is just one of these fascinating things that unless someone can ever find the Copley's archive, we may never find the answer to, but it's just lovely things like this that really fascinate me about old patterns. So here we are, Copley's ladies' Lithuanian coat. And as I say, if there is someone from Lithuania who is able to throw some light on whether this is a traditionally typical Lithuanian design, that would just be wonderful.